Yeah.
It says the stream is
Oh,
live.
oh yeah. Okay, good. It's live. All right. Okay, here we go.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
All right, so we had a bit of a technical difficulty there at the beginning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sublation Magazine stream. Welcome, Sublation Media viewers, readers, and writers. I'm Douglas Lain, author of a variety of books such as Last Week's Apocalypse, Fall into Time, and Billy Moon. But before I let Benjamin Studebaker introduce himself, I want to tell everyone about a new perk at the Sublation Patreon. I'm leading a bi-weekly writers workshop with a socialist bent. The aim is to create a cadre of writers for what I'm calling expansive realism. That is a cadre of expansive realist writers. We're going to be working on producing working class literature or a map of the working class, and we're writing essays that will be considered for publication through Sublation. We're using the Milford approach to workshopping and reading realist works ranging from Balzac to Breton. So if you'd like to write your way to socialism, check it out or join up. Okay, Benjamin, your turn.
Very cool. Well, I'm Benjamin Studebaker. I did my PhD at the University of Cambridge in Politics and International Studies, and I'm the author of two books, The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way is Shut, and Legitimacy in Liberal Democracies, published last fall with Edinburgh University Press.
All right. So we're going to be talking about Doge, that little dog you pointed out to me before the stream started. Looking at scans. The Doge coin icon, and also now Doge the agency. Actually, we're going to be really discussing Doge, the heroic agency within the federal government, cutting spending, purging the bureaucracy of pork and corruption, and just making everyone's life so much better. So I thought I'd just start out by pointing out that a few weeks ago I wanted to go through all the reports released from Elon Musk through Doge and evaluate all the claims. I have not done that, but I have taken a pass through the most recent updates on the Doge website. And from what I'm seeing, I think that if I were to spend the time to really investigate every claim, what I'm going to find and say, what I found recently is what I would find overall. First of all, the Doge website is only an archive of tweets. This means that what we're being given are a series of vague claims, usually without links to primary documents or validating evidence. And here's just the first example. There's a link to a tweet from Secretary of State Mark Rubio. He says, after a 6-week review, we are officially canceling 83% of the programs at USAID. In consultation with Congress, we intend for the remaining 18% of programs we are keeping, approximately 1,000, to now be administered more effectively through the State Department. What this means is that Rubio, as USAID's acting head, has the executive power to cut the staff and cancel programs within the agency's existing structure, saying he's already downsized the agency by 83%. However, permanently moving the remaining programs to the State Department, that goes beyond temporary oversight, and it would require the Congress to approve it, to approve the change. So this announcement doesn't tell us anything about the nature of the cuts, and it doesn't expose what USAID has been doing or justify the cuts. It just tells us that there have been massive cuts, which we already knew, and that he's going to have to work with the Congress if he wants to really shift the administration of those programs that were under USAID. So what do you make of that example, or of the USAID story, or of Doge?
Yeah, it's a tidal wave. of actions, as they like to say, flooding the zone, doing a huge number of things, more things than anybody can check. And what it really relies upon is this basic question of, who do you trust more, government bureaucrats or a tech oligarch? And this is a question that I think many people have an intuitive feeling about, one way or the other. And there isn't a whole lot that anybody could say or show in terms of evidence that would affect which side of that fence people fall on. One of the things that I think we have seen in the last couple of decades, at least, is a decline in the confidence in experts, in epistemic discourses coming out of universities and coming out of bureaucracies. And this decline creates an opening to cut a lot of this stuff. The bureaucrats have kind of insisted that you just should defer to them because otherwise you're bad and deplorable. They haven't really gone to the trouble of legitimating the things they're doing, of explaining what they do and why they do it in such a way that somebody might be persuaded that it is actually their good to support these programs. And Musk is able to take advantage of that legitimation deficit and the trust problems that it creates to make a lot of cuts. And then it's very difficult for us to parse them. And he's able to get away with it insofar as he can because there's so little trust in the bureaucrats that many people who are working people are more inclined to trust a tech oligarch to make these decisions. A tech oligarch who is interested in passing a major tax cut or in keeping the Trump tax cuts from the first Trump administration. And therefore is looking for fiscal arguments to justify retaining those tax cuts, even though I think many people are aware that there's a tax cut that's either coming or it's going to be capped. There's nonetheless so little confidence in the bureaucrats and the technocrats right now that substantial parts of the population are willing to trust the oligarch.
Well, I'm with them. I don't trust the oligarch, but and I actually wouldn't categorize him as an oligarch. I would categorize him as a part of the neoliberal bureaucratic apparatus at this point. Because like any outside contractor who gets hired for the bureaucracy, he has become entwined with the bureaucracy. He's not separate from it now. He is a member, a part of the administrative state. And he's operating on a very similar basis, and he's acting as an expert in the worst possible way. I want to run a clip for that come from a movie called Office Space that reminded me, or that Elon Musk reminded me of, as I was reading through the Doge website. Here it is.
We have sort of a problem here. Yeah, you apparently didn't put one of the new cover sheets on your TPS reports. Oh.
So that is in response to this tweet, and all we've got on this website are tweets. It says the Program Support Center in the HHS processes about $215 billion a year, $860 million a business day in grant payments. When those payments are made, if the grantee is directly drawing, no documentation, receipt, or explanation is required. If the agency is approving, there's no justification or documentation required either. Starting this week, grantees who are drawing money must include a brief justification what the money will be used for, and agencies who are approving must include a brief justification of what the money will be used for and why they are approving. So this amounts to creating TPS reports for the grantees and those who are approving the dispersal because they are drawing funds from pre-approved budgets as they execute programs that have been approved. Grantees within nonprofits and university programs are already required by federal regulation to maintain internal records of how they spend these dollars from the federal government. These records are available to the HHS on a quarterly or annual basis already, and the HHS retains the right to periodically audit the agencies. So all this does is add one more point of data into the mix, and that's it. It's just more paperwork. That's all it is. I'm going to run this.
You see, we're putting the cover sheets on all TPS reports now before they go out. Did you see the memo about this?
I love that.
Yeah. But it really is not different than that. Musk is simply adding more bureaucratic steps in a process that is already regulated, and it is not as though you've got university programs just taking money out of the government without saying what they're going to do for it or do with it. But it sounds vaguely good in a tweet, I suppose, written in the Musk style.
Yeah, and it selects for people who are good at doing paperwork, who are rarely the people who are best at the substance of the work.
Right.
That's
right.
Always a problem in administrative apparatuses. Selecting for people who are good at filling out forms is not a good strategy if you want the best possible work.
So Spencer Leonard is in the chat, and he says, programs that are approved by whom? By Congress or by the bureaucracy? Well, by the bureaucracy, right? By the HHS. I mean, Congress creates these agencies, and then the agencies are empowered to spend based on their budgets allocated by the Congress, right?
Well, it will vary. There will be some cases in which Congress will have stipulated specific things, and there will be other cases in which there's funding for a department for a more general purpose, with the department having a lot of flexibility about what to do. Congress has the ability to bind these departments to spend in quite specific areas, but it also sometimes allocates money with a much more free-floating and open-minded attitude to how the executive might actually disperse the funds. So this is why it would be relevant and valuable to be able to evaluate the specific cases. But one of the problems that we're having is that the internet has become a dumpster fire. It's extremely difficult to actually do independent research now and check any of the things that people say. Back in 2015, I could go write blog posts and do extensive research for free on the internet about anything that might be happening and try to construct a narrative on the basis of what I could find. And I would feel reasonably confident that I'd be able to find stuff that would be able to tell me, something about what I should write. Now, that's extremely difficult to do. It really just comes down to trust. And that's why the website that explains the activity is just a bunch of tweets, because he has no interest in convincing anyone who isn't likely already to be convinced by the argument that is principally in terms of trust. He thinks that there's enough of a trust problem with the bureaucracy that he can simply tweet all of this stuff out, because the people who are likely to be interested in what he's doing have so little confidence in the bureaucracy that they wouldn't be interested in a white paper or in a well-sourced blog post or piece of journalism anyway. They have no confidence in any of that. So as far as the likely audience for the activity is concerned, why not just have a bunch of tweets from, and I do think he is an oligarch, Doug. Oligarchs can hold office. You can have ruling oligarchs. Mm-hmm. He's got an enormous amount of money, of the kind of money that you would typically associate with an oligarch.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, if he's an oligarch, does that make the United States an oligarchy?
Well, not necessarily, and it would depend on the sense. There's a book by Jeffrey Winters that I like from 2011 in which he claims the United States is a civil oligarchy. It's a regime that has oligarchs that play significant and important roles, but those roles are mediated by a set of competitive impersonal institutions that compel the elites to compete with each other and keep the elite to some degree inclusive. So it's possible for a new elite to come along from a new economic sector that's developing, say the tech sector, and enter into the elite and enter into the political system. And that would be what would differentiate this system from other more overt oligarchies in which a small group holds power and denies anybody entry into it. Say like a party state or a small royal family, something like that. Well,
I wonder because, I mean, if he's an oligarch, then I suppose we've been run by oligarchs and as an oligarchy for quite a long time. This isn't a unique. His role in government is more transparent than most, but I think that to say we're an oligarchy suggests that a group of rich people have power and authority over the state that they don't have. That we have elected representatives in the Congress and the executive. We have a judiciary which isn't fully peopled by oligarchs. They have influence over the policies that are created, but that influence isn't universal. And there's just as much influence being run out of elite universities over the kinds of policies that are created as out of, Elon Musk's headquarters or even out of open secrets,
Well, you can also have a mixed regime in which oligarchs play one of the major roles, but not the only role in the regime type, right? A lot of politeas and republics have an oligarchic element, but that element is not total, right? The reason that you would have something like a civil oligarchy would in part be because the oligarchs are in dialogue with other parts of the system. They don't completely dominate it to the degree that they might have done in previous periods or eras.
Can an oligarch just be rich? I mean, does that the definition of an oligarch, or does he need to have political, or she need to have political power?
Some kind of political role. It doesn't necessarily mean that the oligarchs alone completely dominate the system.
Mm-hmm.
Just that they have a role that they play in the system that's significant.
Mm-hmm.
And Winters, with this idea of a civil oligarchy, he emphasizes that the oligarchs don't have to always directly participate in rule. They can indirectly participate through contributions that they make, not just in the form of, say, campaign contributions or, say, control over or ownership of media, but by funding all of these NGOs and quangos and other kinds of outfits that then become mechanisms for funneling money in a way which appears to be non-biased or neutral to their various preferred factions within the professional class.
What's the difference between a fascist state and an oligarchy? Because in a fascist state, you have this kind of merging of big capital and the state. Is fascism just another kind of oligarchy?
Well, fascism usually involves a greater emphasis on corporatism and on corporate forms, whereas oligarchy is more general and doesn't necessarily have that corporate element.
And when you say corporate, you don't mean corporations as we know them in the United States, but something altogether different, right?
A kind of corporatism in which the wealthy are directly fused to the state through corporate mechanisms in such a way that the state is able to dominate the wealthy, potentially, rather than the reverse. So with fascism, you don't have the oligarchs in position to make decisions or even to contribute very substantially to decisions. You have the oligarchs having appendaged themselves to the state to protect themselves from something else.
Okay. Well, so it sounds like an oligarchy would be preferable to fascism in a way, because there's more competition between the capitalists and civil society than there would be between members of a uniparty who would control the state and the oligarchs or the richest.
Oh yeah, fascism is the worst regime of all. The worst regime of all. I'm happy to say fascism is the worst regime of all. But usually we're not really worried about fascism as such. We do have, I think there is a question of a sort of managerial total structure. And that total structure, I think, has oligarchic elements to it, but is not straightforwardly oligarchic because it does involve creating this bureaucratic state apparatus, which is in dialogue then with these more independent oligarchic sources of political input. So this would be a system in which you do have a bureaucratic state apparatus, but that bureaucratic state apparatus doesn't straightforwardly dominate oligarchs. Nor do the oligarchs straightforwardly dominate that apparatus, but there's a kind of mediation that occurs. And that mediation doesn't straightforwardly run all one way or all the other way. It has enough openness to it that at different points or different moments, different factions might prevail or might make progress in some way, shape, or form against each other, but not in such a way that this competition would be ended or that a single victor would be declared. And well, I think that's where the hyperbole kicks in, where people claim that the whole state is run by the deep state bureaucratic managers or the whole thing is run by the oligarchs.
Right. I just at this moment, I feel as though the emphasis on Elon Musk as an oligarch serves the purpose of delegitimizing the last election. I mean,
it's because they think that democracy, they want to appendage democracy to the support of the bureaucrats. They want to say that in some way, shape, or form, we only have democracy insofar as we take the side of the managers. So they're identifying democracy with the management and with the bureaucracy, which is a strange thing to do. In the 80s, there was that show, Yes, Minister, that was very much about how the elected minister is frustrated by a set of bureaucrats, a kind of Thatcherite complaint about trying to reform the state and being in various ways fobbed off by bureaucrats. I think that's broadly the Republican critique at this point. It's something like a Yes, Minister Thatcherite argument, which is not anti-democratic. In their minds, this is about protecting the elected officials from having the democratic decisions mutilated by bureaucrats or fobbed off or put off indefinitely by bureaucrats. That seems to me that that's a perspective that would be internal to democratic theory, not outside of it. And that could be the case even if the particular people who are driving the critique are oligarchs or very rich people. Democracy is not straightforwardly rule by a demos and not oligarchs. Democracy is a much more complicated political system than that, which includes oligarchic elements, at least the kind of democracy that we know in the United States.
So, like, if Steve Bannon was running Doge, would that be preferable than having Elon Musk run Doge? Do you think, in the minds of the critics of Doge, because he's not a billionaire, he's not an oligarch at all, but he would be in this position to enforce the will of the new executive and to make these kinds of cuts as he saw fit, and make recommendations. Would that be better?
Well, I think that the personal involvement of oligarchs in politics through the taking up of offices or the straightforward purchasing of media, say Twitter or the Washington Post, is symptomatic of a feeling among oligarchs that they are not able to, by hiring people or by making donations to various causes, have an adequate level of influence over the trajectory of the system. That the bureaucrats have in some way gone rogue or taken up their own position against them in the system and have become unresponsive to the standard forms of influence that the oligarchs would use, say, funding think tanks, funding alternative research, funding political organizations, NGOs, making your donations to Heritage or the American Enterprise Institute or whichever of these groups from the 70s you might think is the group for you. This doesn't seem to be having the effects that they would like it to have. In particular, they seem really exercised about a lot of the DEI stuff and a lot of the equity stuff, which they regard as contrary to meritocracy and therefore contrary to good results. And so they have decided to become more personally involved because of a chronic dissatisfaction. And so for the administrators, their personal involvement is indicative that they have caused enough trouble to these guys that they have in some way decided to act against them. And so the personal involvement of Musk heightens it. The fact that he can't simply entrust this to somebody else, he can't simply make donations and hope for someone else to do the work, shows that the conflict has intensified to a point at which these people are being dragged into frontline politics. They're being dragged into, and this was something that they sought. The Biden administration, by dragging the heads of the social media companies through all of those hearings in the late 10s, forced these people into the limelight, subjected them to a ton of negative media attention, compelled them to go, okay, if the media is going to treat us in this way, and if the elected officials are going to treat us in this way, then we have to be more directly involved so as to prevent us from being treated in this way. So they started buying up the media that was criticizing them, and they started getting involved in making government decisions because of a sense that there was bureaucratic overreach. Now, that isn't to say that it's more democratic for the oligarchs to be involved than it is for the bureaucrats to be involved, or vice versa. I think it's really a power struggle among different factions within the elite and within the apparatus. It's not, neither one of these, I think, really could claim to have a democratic mandate. The election was very tight. You have only, a majority of 3 in the House for the Republicans. It's not like there's some enormously huge groundswell on behalf of either side. Nevertheless, there is a quite serious dispute between the two. And so there's going to be an attempt to try to move things more in the direction of these oligarchs who are part of a rising elite, a tech sector elite, which is new to the system, is kind of new money, is looking to be taken up and included. For a long time, asked to be included on friendly terms, said, come and regulate us, talk to us about how you want to regulate us. We'll be involved in the regulating. And then found that they were getting regulated, not in an open, transparent process, but through threats and through hearings and through trial by the press. They were not being invited into a regulatory discussion of the kind that they would observe that older economic sectors, older elites in other parts of the economy were being invited to. They weren't being treated like the healthcare industry. They weren't being treated like, defense contractors or like, Walmart. They were being treated as bad, misbehaved internet children. And this ticked them off. And I think it's very understandable that they're ticked off. But of course, that doesn't mean that everything they do in response will be good and helpful.
Well, listen, I just want to push back on that a little bit, because while it's true that Elon Musk bought Twitter because he was unhappy with the politics of Twitter and the way he thought it was being censored, when it comes to Zuckerberg and Bezos and Bill Gates, these people have been consistently supporting Democrats up until very recently, and Bill Gates continues to. It's not as though in the last election, they when, by the way, the heat was really on them, they decided to jump ship and try to oppose the Democrats. That happened basically when they saw the writing on the wall, and they just started shifting over to where they need to have influence to maintain the contracts that they so rely upon to exist.
Yeah, it's hard to say to what degree they have been wanting to make that shift for a while, but scared or afraid that if they made that shift, they would pay a price, and to what degree they really were genuinely indifferent and simply picked whichever was the winning horse. And it's hard in part because the character of the way in which they were picked on by the bureaucrats was, through an attempted intimidation. Lindsey Graham going, "You don't think you have a monopoly?" To try to scare these guys. It was really an intimidation thing where members of Congress and the press and the bureaucrats all got together, and they, Zuckerberg tried to do this tour of the universities where he tried to talk to university academics about what he could do on Facebook to get people to stop criticizing him. And he, did this whole trying to listen to the experts thing where he went and put himself in front of these people, let them criticize him, subjected himself to the Maoist struggle sessions about misinformation. And what did he get for that? A lot of ill treatment. So I do think that there may have been more desire on the part of some of these people to get out from under the Democrats than they let on.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the other thing that I would say is that if you're claiming that it's new that the oligarchs are feeling the need to get directly involved, I would just point to Ross Perot and Bloomberg.
This
and
comes
others.
And goes. Their involvement comes and goes depending on whether they feel a need. And there are periods where they back off and they don't take as direct a role, and then there are other periods where they mobilize more.
Yeah, but I mean, I've seen a pretty consistent mobilization over the last, at least 2, 3, 4 elections. I mean, with Bloomberg entering the race in 2020 because he was unhappy with Biden as a representative of his politics, and with the attempt, hell, Donald Trump, a billionaire, started to consider running for president in 2000 as part of the Reform Party, coming right off of Ross Perot. So I just don't know if I think there's much more consistency here in terms of the involvement.
You're right to emphasize a certain long-term tendency. I wouldn't say that oligarchization is new or that it's never happened before. I would describe this as a continuous element that's in the system and has been in the system really at every point to varying degrees and with various levels of overt presence. And certainly Trump running is itself a case of this. It's a billionaire choosing to get personally involved instead of behaving in the way that we might expect billionaires to behave, of sponsoring and funding various other kinds of things. And many of the guys who were in the Trump administration in the first administration were very, very wealthy people like Wilbur Ross or the Secretary of Education, DeVos. There were some very, very wealthy people involved. And that is sometimes also the case in Democratic administrations. Insofar as there's been a change, it's that specific tech sector billionaires who formerly aligned with the Democratic Party have switched allegiance.
Well, listen, one thing I want to just to completely agree with you about, and I'm not even sure if you've said this, but I think we'll agree about this, is that, and you did say this, is that when we look to Elon Musk and what he's doing in the government right now, whatever the claims might have been rhetorically during the campaign when he was campaigning with Trump, or what he said when he purchased Twitter, there is nothing of the transparency and the aim to communicate with the public or facilitate free speech in Doge right now. It simply is as opaque as any other government agency, and worse, actually. And I'll give you another example from what I saw. One of the tweets that he sent out was this: the VA canceled a $56,000 contract to water 8 plants for 5 years. This amounted to $1,400 a plant per year. The contract has been canceled, and Doge will water the plants free of charge. All right, so that's untrue. That just is untrue. The contract wasn't just for 8 plants. There were 8 plants that were on a particular floor, and they took a picture of them, and there was little signs saying, "Don't water these 8 plants. We have an outside contractor that will water these plants for us." But that doesn't mean that that's all the contractor did. It was a landscaping service, and they had a contract to water upwards of around 50 plants inside the building, and most likely to do upkeep for the whole facility and outside and in. And it was so all they've done is cancel the landscaping service for a VA hospital, right, or building. So the whole thing is, and it was $58,000. You're talking about a $58,000 contract for over 5 years. Not even that's not even per year. That's a 5-year expense of $58,000. Is that even? That's not even a bad rate, I don't think. So but it looks good. They can make the claim that it was about watering 8 plants by playing fast and loose with the facts. It's the kind of thing Democrats do all the time. They'll say something that's true, and then but they're leaving out so much context that it is misleading. They have a term for it in the world of disinformation or anti-disinformation struggles. They call it malinformation. So this was malinformation from Doge. But I would just say that given how the techniques are the same, whether it's coming from the Democratic Party or from Musk's Doge, the emphasis on Musk seems ill-placed to me. The whole thing, what he's doing, it seems to me is going to have a minuscule effect on the overall budget. And the real battle isn't being fought through Doge, but through Trump and the Congress and the courts. And it's the move to get rid of USAID that may have been recommended by Doge, but it's never been explained why. It's just that that Trump wanted to get rid of it, and he put Marco Rubio as the head of it in order to do that. And so this is what the battle's about, and it's political as much as it is fiscal, more than it is fiscal. So anyway, that's my final verdict on Doge. It's a distraction. It's a propaganda arm of the Trump administration, and it works for both parties to focus on Elon Musk rather than on what's actually going on in the government.
And it also makes it very easy if at such a point at which there's a real popularity problem, Trump can just really, really publicly fire and humiliate Elon Musk. And as a consequence of doing that, a lot of the criticisms of the administration will, collide with that Musk meat shield and not actually touch the president.
Yeah, the Musk
by raising
meat
him
shield
to this level of prominence, he just creates a very easy way of generating more public support at a later point.
Right.
And I think that it also distracts from the budget fight, which is where we really will figure out if there's going to be this continuation of the Trump tax cut. And if so, what form will that take? And how will they rationalize being able to do that? What will their explanations for that be? A lot of the fight is really about trying to create a bad reputation for the civil service, to undermine further trust in it with sensational stories like that plant story, for the purposes of then winning a budget fight, which is really the key fight. And usually when the Republicans fight this budget fight, it undermines their public approval and makes it hard for them to win the midterm. If they do a big tax cut for the rich and they're framed as simply doing giveaways, corrupt giveaways to their buddies, then they have a hard time winning the midterm after having done that. But if they're able to frame it in terms of this is about getting rid of corruption by the bureaucrats, and maybe you'll even get a check out of it worth a certain amount of money, then they might be able to get away with passing this budget, roughly the same budget they would have passed in any case, or which any Republican president would likely have tried to pass. They might be able to get away with it without the same level of public opinion hit. And I think that's really the goal. The goal is to pass that budget, pass that tax cut extension without taking the public opinion hit that they took in the first Trump administration over the course of 2017.
I want to address this comment here from Conceptus Dea. Musk stopped payments and legally downloaded data to private servers. If there was a temporary freeze on disbursement, but it didn't come from Musk. He didn't like cancel the payments by hitting a button on the computer and controlling the treasury. That was by order of Trump and has been undone by the courts. And as far as illegally downloading data to private servers, I haven't heard that, but the thing to remember is that that may be true, that maybe he may have downloaded data to private servers. I hadn't heard that, but the emphasis on the privacy concerns that Doge raises, that's coming out of the Democrats, is sort of sick-making to me, given that we're living at a time when NSA contractors are capturing everyone's data and securing it for the state every day. So we have the permanent surveillance by outside contractors. And we've known about this since 2013. So for everyone to suddenly be panicky because some auditor with a Twitter account and a bad sense of decorum and fashion is getting access to the government computers for a time, it strikes me as insane. That just is completely misplaced fear.
I also think we're going through a period of evangelical legalism in which people are developing their own personal relationships with the Constitution and deciding what's legal or illegal based on those personal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Right.
not waiting for the expert judges that ostensibly we're supposed to trust and believe in to tell us what the law means, to interpret it. They're forming their own kind of ad hoc judgments about what is happening and what's legal or illegal in a very bad information environment, where it's quite hard, even for those of us who study and follow this stuff all the time, to know precisely what's happening, let alone the status of the legality of all of the various things. And a lot of people are positioning themselves as if they are authorities on what will the ultimate legal finding be. And they think that if the Supreme Court doesn't rule the way that they would rule based on their own personal reading of the law, then that means that the Supreme Court has been captured by the MAGA movement and belongs to Donald Trump. So we're getting into a stage where if the Supreme Court doesn't do everything that people who don't like what's going on think it should be doing, this is just going to be more evidence to them that the whole system is authoritarian. It's a kind of unfalsifiable theory in which the personal relationship with the Constitution is the only thing really that is telling them anything about what's true or what's false.
There was a guy back in 2000, let's see, I forget his name, Vincent somebody, who wrote a book called None Dare Call It Treason. I think it was something like that. And he was also known for his work on JFK and defending the Warren Commission. No, that's wrong. He was also known for his work on the Manson killings. Forget that. He was not involved with JFK at all. But in any case, let's just go from Manson to JFK. There's my segue, all right? But my point was that in 2000, that was the first time I heard, and there was a sense that the Supreme Court was corrupt. It was completely partisan. It wasn't to be trusted. They were treasonous. They should all recuse themselves. And that was after the 2000 election of Bush. So the this distrust of the courts and the tendency for political commentators to call them out for their
corruption. I think it's fine for people to distrust the courts, but then if you distrust the courts and you think other people should distrust the courts, wouldn't the upshot of that be that we're going to have major disagreements about what the Constitution says and about what's legal and illegal? It's going to be very difficult to resolve those disagreements, and in many cases the disagreements will be good faith, with people on both sides thinking that perhaps they are engaging in legal activity and genuinely wanting to find out if what they're doing is potentially legal and if it possibly can, in fact, be backed by the fundamental law. What people are instead doing is they're going, I don't trust the Supreme Court, but I have infallible knowledge of the content of the law and how it must be applied in this specific case, which is why I use that term evangelical advisedly. This is a level of certainty about what the law says, which conflicts with the mistrust of the courts and of the judges. If you think that the judges are not reliable arbiters of the law, that's fine, but that doesn't make you a reliable arbiter of the law. That just means that we have a bunch of legal opinions, and it's very difficult for us to adjudicate them.
Right. I have, and I've done this myself at times. Most recently about the deportation or possible deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, who was a pro-Palestinian protester at Columbia, who's recently been detained by ICE. And apparently they wanted to revoke his student visa, but then it turned out he already had obtained a green card and had permanent residency status. And so the ICE agent told his lawyer, well, we're going to revoke the green card as well. And it's all based on his pro-Palestinian activism on campus and his leadership role that he took there. And the one rumor I heard is that he released a fart spray inside some building at Columbia and got suspended for that at one point. I just thought, well, this guy, if they deport him or tried to deport him and get him started through the process, he's got clear standing. He's got First Amendment protection. So this won't hold up. This can't hold up, I thought. There's just no way. No court will allow this to happen. But then I thought about it some more and read a little bit more about it. And it turns out, well, but they're also claiming that he's giving material support. They're claiming that the protests themselves are kind of maybe a form of material support to Hamas, and that it's a matter of national security to deport him. And since, the war on terror, the laws around deportation when it comes to national security are very lax. The due process was severely undermined, and they might be able to get away with telling a judge, no, this is a matter of national security. We can't provide you with the evidence against this guy. It's classified, but you just have to believe us and do as we say. And that could work. So,
yeah, and that doesn't mean that you have to say that it's right if it works or that you agree with it. You think it's a good thing.
Right.
What is legal, or what's going to be ruled to be legal by the courts, is not necessarily in any kind of correspondence with truth, justice, the good, morality, right, wrong, any other values that we might bring into it. And so when we start throwing around these terms like legality, I think, where do we get this assumption that the law must necessarily agree with what we think? Otherwise, it's not democratic. If we don't agree with the law, it's not democratic. This is very bizarre thinking.
I guess it comes down to, like, Vincent, what is his name here? I finally found it. It's called None Dare Call It Treason. It was written by Vincent Bugliosi, and he said that because the court had violated the Constitution so profoundly that it was an act of treason and was undemocratic. And he's a lawyer, so he had some claim to know, but it's not a matter of the laws being the wrong laws. It's a matter of the Constitution being interpreted.
It's like saying he's a priest who's left the church, so he has some basis for having his opinion. Yes, but then there's still the Big Lebowski problem of that's like your opinion, man. No individual, regardless of what level of qualification they have, can simply overturn, legally a decision that's taken by the institution. And so you can't say on the one hand that if Trump defies the courts, then he's behaving undemocratically. And on the other hand, say that if the courts go along with Donald Trump, then that's also undemocratic. This produces a situation where there's absolutely no way anything can occur without you claiming that it's all undemocratic. It's just an attitude that people are determined to have no matter what happens.
Right. Well, one last thing on this point, and then I do want to talk about JFK briefly, and I'm not sure we'll get to the short story this week or not, but it's a very short story. But the battle that I understand to be going on right now is really about who's going to have authority over the administrative state, over all these agencies within the executive, or is largely about that. And there's an attempt being made the Attorney General made a statement saying, from now on, interpreting the law is going to be the priority and the prerogative of the President of the United States and the Attorney General, and that's where it stops. And what he meant by that was not that the courts wouldn't be having a say, but rather that it would not be the role of the Congress, and it would not be the role of the agencies independently. And that last point, I think, is the most important one. That he's claiming all the executive branch should follow the directives of the executive in terms of interpreting what their own regulations mean, what the laws mean in terms of their executive function, and where they should go going forward.
The legislature has its mechanism for saying that it feels that the executive has enforced the law in a way which is out of accordance with the legislature's will to such a degree that the legislature won't tolerate it. And that's the impeachment mechanism. The legislature retains that. And I don't think that they are denying that the legislature retains the impeachment mechanism.
No. No, but they can also pass legislation trying to block decisions that he's making, or saying that he doesn't have the right to claim authority over certain agencies within the executive.
Yeah, and then in those cases, they would have to override the veto, and then the Supreme Court would likely be involved to litigate.
Yeah, that's right. That last bit is the important bit, because even what it's actually coming down to now is it's about previous legislation that tried to limit the president's ability to impound funds, which has been a source of tension in political battles since the time of Nixon, and which Trump is claiming is unconstitutional, and which he's going to ignore. And so then that's headed towards the courts. He can't veto that legislation, but he can
he can raise that in the judiciary, and the judiciary can make a ruling. Nobody waits for the judiciary to make a ruling, because nobody seems to care what the judiciary says, which is weird, because they're claiming that they're trying to defend the Constitution of the United States, in which the judiciary has a very large role.
Yeah, but actually recently there was a decision from the Supreme Court that everyone did pay attention to, which was that Trump had tried to have an emergency block from the Supreme Court and placed on a decision from a lower court, undoing the spending freeze that he had ordered. And the Supreme Court did not side with Trump and said, no, you're going to have to wait until your day in court to regain that power and have it adjudicated, and it will probably be the Supreme Court eventually where it will be decided, but we're not going to give you this emergency injunction to disrupt the legal process and have it now, and then also have it adjudicated later, which would have had to have been done either way. But and it does matter politically, like it is a political defeat for Trump, because if you can establish it in fact, then it's a lot easier to win in court, I think.
Yeah, and if you look at what the right is saying, the right is very concerned about Amy Coney Barrett. Amy Coney Barrett isn't on their side. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They're very concerned about Amy Coney Barrett. Not one of us, they say.
I always kind of liked her, but just for all the wrong reasons. But the point is that you're right, that people just want the courts and the politicians and the Congress just to do what they think is right. And what they think is right was whatever their party says is right, for the most part. There's very little independent thinking going on, it seems to me.
And insofar as there is independent thinking going on, it's of this evangelical kind. It's not political thinking. It's not thinking about this as a system in which there's lots of different inputs, and then those inputs go through procedures which then produce decisions. It's in terms of, what does my conscience tell me the law says? And then anyone who doesn't abide by what has been revealed to me is an authoritarian.
Right, and what's been revealed to you has always been revealed to you, or most of the time has been revealed to you by talking points from James Carville. But anyway, that was maybe an overstatement. I want to say a little bit about, first of all, I want to address briefly Spencer Leonard's question. He says, when Musk helps to defund programs, are these attacks on the working class? And I would say not necessarily. Certainly when you go after USAID, no. And some people would say when you go after, the CFPB, or the Elizabeth Warren's agency that is regulating banks and protecting consumers, that might be an attack on the working class, or certain segment of the working class. But
depends on what you think the regulatory agency does, the specific regulatory agency in question, what its function is. And the difficulty is that we're not able to get into the weeds about any of these discussions, because we're just getting very, very broad claims. We'll hear thousands of people at this department or that department have been fired. We won't be told specifically what any of them do. In the 80s, in that yes minister period, the emphasis was on transparency in the government.
Mm-hmm.
But that is completely gone from this. It's just a question of who do you trust, the bureaucrats or the people trying to stop and fight the bureaucrats. And so it becomes very Schmittian. It becomes very whom, and there isn't much space for being able to have a real discussion about any of the specific things that are in play. You're invited to either have a positive attitude to the administrators or a negative attitude, and that's about it.
Well, I have a negative attitude, but I try to be a little more open than just that. So let's see here. I want to go into, the JFK section of this, finally. A little while ago, Representative Anna Paulina Luna from Florida was appointed by House Speaker Mike Johnson to head up the JFK assassination records declassification effort. She recently told the press that there were thousands of newly released files, or newly discovered files, and they haven't been released yet, that would be released. And that based on what she's seen so far, there were 2 shooters involved in the assassination. So Oliver Stone, Peter Dale Scott, and many other skeptics of the Warren Commission's findings, including myself, seem vindicated. The magic bullet theory has been put to rest. However, she also said that the release of the files is being obstructed by various bureaucrats overseeing the archive. Again, those damn bureaucrats. It's apparently being dealt with. Maybe Elon's helping out there. But believers in the magic bullet and lone gunman fantasies, such as a political hack and probable intelligence asset and alien hybrid Gerald Posner, are saying nothing will come from the declassification. Still, Luna's assertions seem to indicate something big should be coming. But so far, the declassification hasn't taken place. We don't know if the plan for declassification was submitted to the DNI within the 15-day deadline. That hasn't been made clear. And we don't have any announced schedule for actual transparency or the release of the files. So that's where we're at right now with this big declassification effort. I would just remind everyone to remember that JFK's head went back into the left. But other than that, I'm a little irritated that there hasn't been more progress on the JFK files and declassification. Any opinion about that, Ben?
Yeah, I think that they have reversed the leaking strategy. They've turned the leaking strategy against the leakers. In that first Trump administration, you might remember all of this concern about the bureaucrats and civil servants leaking things negatively to undermine the administration. And we have had one, really major leak out of ostensibly the contents of the meeting that took place between Musk and Rubio and some of these other people. Reports of infighting between Musk and Rubio over USAID, and Donald Trump denies completely that happened. He says that that conflict that has been reported by The Hill and others did not take place. Nevertheless, that's being claimed. These kinds of leaks did a lot of damage politically to the administration in 2017. Now the administration has turned that strategy back on the bureaucrats and is leaking things like there's this classified information that hasn't been released yet that would confirm your theories, but they won't let us release the information.
Right.
It would seem to me to be illegal to leak that if it were true.
Well, no, if it weren't true, you mean to say that if it weren't true, or if it were true?
No, to say it if it were true. If it's classified and they haven't declassified it, then it might be technically illegal to say it if it's true, given that it remains classified. But that would just be me guessing. I have no idea.
Right. I mean, but there was already a deadline for declassification that had passed.
Right. And certainly the executive branch would have to enforce it. And since the executive branch wants to declassify it anyway, that it wouldn't enforce a prohibition on the leaking of it when it hasn't yet been all the way declassified. I certainly see how Trump, it could be an effective tactic for the administration.
Trump can just wave his hand and say, this is declassified. The question then is, how is it going to be declassified? To what extent is it going to be declassified? But the head of the team to to oversee the declassification chose, on the authority of the president and the Speaker of the House, to say, from what she's seen, there were two shooters. So
okay. So this is a person who's been authorized directly to say this. Okay.
No, well, whether she was authorized to say that is not entirely clear, but she was authorized to oversee the process of declassification, and she was saying it at a press conference where she was speaking to when and how the declassification was going to happen, and she didn't.
But she wasn't punished or disciplined for saying.
No, not at all. No.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then it's not technically a leak because it wasn't done in a sneaky way, but it has some of the same functions as a leak in terms of it suggests these people are trying to keep things from you. They're not reliable. They're not trustworthy. And I do think a lot of this, of this information game is really about trying to establish trust or lack thereof in either the bureaucrats or in the administration. And it's no longer a question of facts. It's just a question of trust.
Right. Yeah. So what do you think, though? Do you think that we're going to find out eventually that the Warren Commission was wrong, that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't act alone? I mean, have you know about the magic bullet theory? Have you looked into this at all, Ben?
Yeah, I've heard about all of this. I've never been as interested in the JFK assassination as some, in part because I think JFK was a not very effective president. And the function of the assassination politically has been to pretend that he might have done all kinds of amazing things if only this hadn't happened. But, the actual history of the administration is that he was really struggling to move a lot of legislation because of his lack of experience, that he had been following, plans for things like the Bay of Pigs invasion and then blaming these things on the Eisenhower administration, which he apparently had blindly trusted without properly reviewing the plans that came from the Eisenhower administration. And then Eisenhower led me astray is the response. So it seemed to me like the Kennedy administration was not very competent. And certainly a lot of the things the Kennedy administration was trying to do were advanced much more quickly by Johnson. So I don't know how significant or important Kennedy would have been as a president, apart from maybe he would have been much less effective than Johnson at doing many of the same things. Nevertheless, the assassination has allowed people, and especially RFK's assassination a few years later also, has led to this notion that the Kennedys would have produced some kind of progressive or socialist utopia if only they hadn't been shot. And I think that's the conspiracy theory that for me has been the most damaging to our politics. This fantasy of a Kennedy Democratic Party that's different from the Democratic Party we got, but that we very nearly had if only these Kennedys hadn't been killed. And then the fact that they're killed is used as evidence that they really did pose some kind of radical alternative, that they really did offer something different. It's kept a lot of people in the Democratic Party's box, this thinking.
Well, I don't think it isn't the case that for the most part, the people like Oliver Stone or Peter Dale Scott or other major voices around the Kennedy assassination are not, generally speaking, socialists. The socialists haven't been that interested in the Kennedy assassination. The claim is not that he would have created a socialist utopia, or even that he would have expanded the welfare state, or done the things that Johnson did do more effectively and thoroughly than Johnson, or anything like that. It has to do with foreign policy. That's why this is brought up. It has to do with the Vietnam War, and the claim is that Kennedy was negotiating with Khrushchev and trying to de-escalate the Cold War after the Cuban Missile Crisis in a way that triggered the intelligence agencies and the blob consensus, the DC consensus, to do something about him. That it was considered to be a threat to national security, as it was generally understood within DC. So that's the claim. And it's one that kind of echoes now pretty effectively because of the way in which Trump is being targeted for very severe criticism by people on both the traditional Republican right and within the Democratic Party, both.
Yeah, I've never really bought the claim that Kennedy would have acted very differently on Vietnam from Johnson. I've never really believed that. If you had to ask me, if I had to give an account of why Kennedy was killed, I think the
Mhm.
most likely thing that happened is that he was killed by socialists, and that there was a need to prevent that from getting out because it would have led to a demand for retaliation against the Soviet Union. Uh, I think that people would have tried to frame, true or not true, the people or person or set or whatever it was that killed Kennedy as having some relation to the Soviet Empire or part of an international communist conspiracy. And that would have produced a toxic environment that was frightening. And so there was a need to prevent an open discussion of the motives of the killing so as to prevent some kind of public demand for a confrontation with the Soviet Union.
Well, here's the thing about it. You may be right. You may be 100% right. And I'm not committed to any theory as to why he was killed. But what this, like the investigation into the actual assassination itself and the problems with the Warren Commission's report exposes a corruption of the political and judicial process. Um, we're being asked to believe absurd things, apparently, like the magic bullet theory doesn't hold up for a variety of reasons. One, because of the main one here. I'll give you the one detail that really demonstrates it. Is the bullet was pristine. They had it so it didn't show damage that would normally occur when a bullet hits bone, and it was apparently went through, like, hit bone twice. And also, Connolly, who was the bullet supposedly entered his thigh and then dropped out in the hospital, was found on a stretcher, just laying there. The bullet wound included residue fragments from the bullet, which was significant enough to be too much if the bullet that we're being shown as the magic bullet was the bullet that entered his leg. That bullet's too intact. It couldn't have left behind the fragments that were in Connolly's leg. So I know that's like, I'm going into the weeds on this, but the point is that if you're being asked to believe something that seems demonstrably not to be true for the sake of maintaining the legitimacy of this government, then pushing against that and demanding the truth is all for the good, regardless of what the reality is as to who's responsible. Like the public has a right to know. We're supposed to be the ones in charge of the country. We're supposed to be the ones in charge of the government, not the other way around.
Well, at any rate, the Soviet Union is gone now. So even if my preferred theory is true, there's no Soviet Union that we have to not go to war with.
Right, that's true. And it probably would have been Cuba, through Cuba, right? So if that, which
it's possible. I've also heard the theory that Oswald was a disgruntled applicant to the Soviet intelligence services.
I just think that the American people should be trusted with information, even if it's information that people of authority and education believe might lead the American people to make rash decisions. I think that the American people should know if Soviet spies are being sent over to assassinate the President of the United States. And then it should be the responsibility of politicians and the public to decide what to do with that information, rather, it just shows a basic distrust.
You pay a long-term price for having tried to cover something up in a shoddy way. If you're going to cover something up, you have to actually cover it up. If you cover it up in a shoddy way where people are still able to spot holes in what you're doing, then it produces a long-term trust problem. that you'll suffer from in many future instances that are not even directly connected to the thing that initially caused the distrust. And maybe in some way, shape, or form, Doge and what's currently going on is downstream from the concealment of whatever happened with Kennedy.
No, I totally agree that that is the truth. But there is another side to that even, which is if you can get people to accept your shoddy job of covering up a story just based on convincing them that it's in their best interest to turn off their brain and conform to the worst stories and the most obvious lies, then you've got a lot of control in that moment. I guess that's what's known as gaslighting. It's when you do that, isn't that what that?
Well, when somebody starts to ask questions or to become suspicious, you just go, "What are you, crazy? Of course this is what happened. Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? You saw this with your own eyes.
What happened to you? You used to be smart. How did you become such an evil man?" They'll ask you things like that.
Yes. When were you radicalized and by whom?
That's right. All right. Well, listen, why don't we end it there? But people should, the story this week was supposed to be, what was it? The J.G. Ballard story.
About the JFK and the race.
It was
as a race.
Yeah, the assassination of Kennedy is seen as a automobile race. It's roughly the title of the story. And we'll see you in Zoom if you're a patron. This week I'm going to have everyone just come into the Zoom who wants to talk, and then I'll upload it after, and people can watch it then. And rather than trying to stream it live. So, and I'll see you in just about 5 minutes or so. I'll be over in the Zoom. All right, guys.